Hi again. Welcome to the third part of the negotiation module. So today we'll be looking into some more advanced techniques that should be surrounding your attempts to building persuasion and good negotiations with other parties. The foundation of this course is based on teachings of FBI lead negotiator Chris Voss, who claims and outlines a fundamental paradox within the negotiation process. Many people think of negotiation as a process which has two parties opposite to each other with fundamentally opposing desires and wants, and the only way to negotiate is to find the midpoint that theoretically at least bridges the two desires and wants of the different parties. However, what we find is that oftentimes we cannot really split the difference in order to be able to find the most beneficial outcome from the negotiation. Sometimes we need to expand the pie in trying to deliver what the other person wants to them, which to do so we have to first most understand what they want and be able to have our needs heard and hence upheld within the negotiation. To do so, we'll be looking into some very specific advanced techniques outlined by Chris Voss and lead negotiators, which are active listening paired with tactical empathy, mirroring paired with labeling, generally asking calibrating questions and calibration as a technique, and finally, another very advanced technique, which is called the no technique. So without further ado, let's get into it. In order to be able to hold good negotiations, you need to be able to project good communication. Communication is not, however, a unidirectional process. It's bidirectional. It means it has two directions. You both hear and you speak. Hence, fundamentally, in order to be able to advance your negotiation techniques, the first thing you need to do is practice active listening. Actually be able to understand what the other person is saying, why they're saying it, if they're expressing any emotions, if they're expressing any specific desires. You should be hearing out very attentively to what the other person is saying. That, paired with tactical empathy, which is showing that you understand when something means a lot to the other person and saying phrases like, I hear that this is very important to you, or I understand that this is of very high value to you and your organization, is a way that you can show the other person that you're not an opponent, but you're working with them in order not to split the difference, but to find a solution that is beneficial both for you and for the other person. Now, to build on active listening, we need to also be able to identify and label or even mirror the other person's utterances and what they say in order to build the rapport necessary to show that you're not only listening, but attentively thinking about what the other person is saying. Mirroring, which is one of the techniques that is within our module, talks about the fact that you can be repeating some of the last few phrases that the other person has said in order to be able to show that you are listening to them, but you're also prompting them to continue talking on that issue. On top of that, we have the labeling technique. A labeling technique is one which essentially puts a label on something that the other person has said or identifies something that is not perhaps entirely obvious to the other person. So while the other person perhaps may be talking and they might be sweating or they might be showing some bodily language cues that tell you that they're anxious or sad or angry, labeling that emotion and saying, it seems that this thought makes you very angry or very sad, is something that can help you build rapport with the other party. It shows you that you can essentially understand the other person, and it helps you build both credibility and trust, which are fundamental in order to be able to move the negotiation forward into the disagreement part and where you need to be talking about the specifics and trying to expand the pie to find a common solution for you and the other person. Now let's take it a step further. Whilst we're listening and mirroring some of the phrases that we hear to show that we are actually attentively listening and also labeling emotions, if we think that we don't entirely get the other person or the other person perhaps finds it difficult to present their case, the obvious thing would be to try and attack them in order to win the negotiation. This is not a good technique. Instead, you should be trying to calibrate the conversation by asking calibrating questions. What are those, you might ask? Calibrating questions are open-ended questions that help you understand what the other person wants, but also shows them that you're actually actively trying to understand their needs and desires. Hence, it's more likely that they would feel like you're on the same team. Some examples might be, what would your ideal scenario be in this situation? What is something that you would like to see change? Is there something here that bothers you? I would like to know. By doing that, you're able to identify very precisely what the other person wants and try to see if what you want can be paired with that in trying to find a solution. Now, for the final part of our third module, we are building onto prior knowledge from the previous ones in order to have a quite advanced negotiation technique be put in use. So we put active listening and loss aversion bias together, which we've looked at in previous parts, and we have the no technique. Now, what is that? We are psychologically wired to feel safety when we say no. As said before, we'll go to greater lengths to avoid losing something than we would go to actually gain something. What does that mean? If I want to ask a question, I calibrate it in a way that doesn't necessitate the other person to say yes first, but that they would say no. Instead of asking, is this now a good time to talk? In which the preferred answer would be yes, it is much better to ask, is it now a bad time to call? By saying no, by making the other person essentially say no and begin with no, they are put in a place of safety, in a place where they feel like they're in control, in a place where essentially we are not entirely in control of the situation. They have some control over us, and we are, at the end of the day, attending to their own boundaries and desires. By trying to get to no first is a way to get to yes later on in the negotiation. So in this module, we've looked at quite advanced techniques that fundamentally build on good negotiation skills. Negotiation skills are built on persuasion, which is another form of communication. And as we've said, communication has two directions. And fundamentally, being advanced as a negotiator begins with being able to identify, label, mirror, and account for what the other person wants, needs, and communicates to you. If the other person finds it difficult to communicate their needs and desires, our job is not to ridicule them or discourage them from doing so, as that will not age very well within the negotiation. Instead, we ask calibrating questions and we make efforts to understand what the other person wants, and when it's time for us to bring out our proposition, we try to incorporate as much of what we have gathered through calibrating questions, through the no technique, and through active listening and mirroring in order to be able to have a well-rounded negotiation. In that way, it's not only possible that you'll get what you want out of the negotiation, but most importantly, you will have a person that wants to negotiate with you again. And this is very important, especially within social work.